Welcome, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Helen Young, and I am with the Feinstein International Center at the School of Nutrition, Science and Policy at Tufts University. We are delighted to have so many of you joining us today to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion in relation to Sudan. At the last count, we have 58 people registered for this event. Let me start with a few housekeeping items before we begin. This event is scheduled for 90 minutes and we will end on or before that. We are looking forward to a lively and engaging discussion and hope that you will participate to ask our panelists questions and also provide your experience, especially if you're listening in from Sudan, at the end during our question and answer session. You can put up your hand to ask a question by clicking the yellow hand at the bottom of the screen. We will be keeping everyone on mute, except for when we invite you to ask your question. We're very keen to hear from our audience, so please do make note of your comments or questions as we go along in readiness for the Q&A session at the end. Now, as we all know, awareness of racism is growing and is a huge issue in the USA, which has triggered the global movement Black Lives Matter, with increasing awareness of racism and wide-ranging reflections and response, particularly bringing our attention to the many ways that racism is embedded in our institutions, and also the way in which prejudices often go unchallenged and sometimes unnoticed, even in our own backyards. Despite this growing awareness of racism internationally, we cannot assume that racism looks the same around the world. And unless we understand how racism and other forms of prejudice are manifest, we risk unintentionally perpetuating racism and potentially entrenching it further. However, understanding racism in another country, an unfamiliar culture, is not necessarily an easy task. Newcomers often get their first impressions from the media, turning, for example, to the BBC and other global news sources, assuming they will provide a useful and relatively neutral overview. However, first encounters with media reporting on Sudan often present simplistic and sometimes inaccurate narratives, especially when it comes to warring factions, with a slew of assumptions about the group identities linked to particular conflicts. Take, for example, the way conflicts in Sudan are sometimes reported: Arabs versus Africans in Darfur, or even farmers versus herders. On the face of it, initially, these identities look fairly unremarkable or even potentially helpful to outsiders trying to understand the conflict and its drivers. However, they are highly problematic on more than two counts. For example, they lack any precision and in fact are so imprecise as to render them unhelpful in terms of gaining any proper understanding of conflict. And second, expressed in this way, perpetuates deeply held prejudices and even pejorative assumptions which are attached to these identities. Pastoralists and nomads are often thought to provoke conflict and violence, while traditional farmers practicing rain-fed farming are sometimes considered backward and undeveloped. Both these viewpoints could not be farther from the truth. And I would argue we can learn much through our research from these producers about the integration of their livelihood systems, and a deeper understanding of this can help to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Anyway, the impetus for today's discussion is the recognition that young researchers or students who are coming from outside to Sudan have a responsibility to better understand racism and other sources of prejudice in the context where they are working, so as to be able to promote better diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this particular online event brings together 3 Sudanese professionals, including researchers and consumers of research. They all come from different backgrounds and disciplines to share their perspectives and discuss how racism manifests itself in Sudan, including challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also how to promote better research practices from their experience. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our 3 speakers. Nawal Hassan Osman, who is a Darfur area expert working towards enduring peace in Sudan. Hassan-Alattar Satti, who is a development and security researcher and independent consultant. And Hussein Sulieman, who is the director of the Center for Remote Sensing at the University of Gadarif in Sudan. Unfortunately, Hussein cannot be with us in person today, and so he has kindly shared recordings of his responses to our questions. I would like to start by giving each of our speakers an opportunity to introduce themselves and tell us something about their background and career paths. So let us start with you, Nawal. Over to you.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Tufts, for inviting us for this panel. And also, I would like to say hello to the participant, and we hope we will have a nice time together. My name is Nawal Hassan. By professional, I did study in social science and also agriculture. The social science I did in Alexandria University. On agriculture, I studied in the Reading University and Deventer, learned STEM in the Netherlands. And I work over 36 years now in the humanitarian development and peace building. And I regard myself as human rights and women rights activist. And also I encounter some work with researchers. I work with Alex Duba in his book, The Famine That Kills, in the 80s. And also I work with doctor from the Netherlands on a book called One Foot in Heaven. And also I contributed in a book called Social Negotiation and Social Space. And I used to write articles in the newspaper whenever there is an issue need to be highlighted, or I like to write about it. And so I have been working with international NGOs, UN agencies, and donor agencies, USAID, for so long time. And that's all I mean, in brief.
Thank you very much, Nawal. You're most welcome. Let us turn now to Hassan.
Thanks a lot, Helen. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot, Helen, and thanks to Tufts University for inviting me to talk in this event. My name is Hassan-Alattar Satti, and I live in Khartoum, Sudan. Originally, I started my professional career working in the farming sector as I graduated from the University of Khartoum Faculty of Animal Production. But I didn't stay very long in that sector. I moved very quickly to the rural development sector because I had passion for that sector. And since 2010, I worked for different international non-governmental organizations. And I worked, for example, with Practical Action, with Oxfam, with Care International. And that experience in rural development exposed me to some of the most conflict-driven regions in Sudan, some of the most unjustly underdeveloped regions in the Sudan, and exposed me to the challenge of doing development in these regions. And that actually encouraged me to think of doing more academic, to enhance my academic experience in those fields. And I did another master's in development, politics of development and security at the University of Bristol in the UK, and I finished that in 2014. Since then, I returned back to Sudan, and I returned I rejoined Oxfam again in 2015, but in 2018, I started to work as an independent consultant, providing research, social surveillance expertise to NGOs working in Darfur, Kordofan, and other regions in Sudan. And I'm also currently a visiting fellow with the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University, working with researchers in a research project focusing on resilience building, livelihoods resilience in Darfur. And yeah, it has been almost three years since, about more than 2 years, basically, since I started that opportunity. Thanks again, Helen, for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I hope we have a good time, fruitful time together.
Thank you very much, Hassan. I'd like to ask Anne now if we can hear from Hussein with his pre-recording. And I'm not hearing it at my end. Can any of the other panelists hear it? Over?
No, I don't hear it.
Bear with me, one small technical difficulty, despite all of our practice. Try another route.
We will be patient. It's worth waiting for.
Yeah. Sorry, something very bizarre is happening here because we had figured out how to do this.
I think you'll all appreciate it's quite difficult organizing these international webinars, and we've actually had a number of practice runs testing the technology. So I'm sure we're going to get there.
Helen, I'm very sorry. I don't know why this is suddenly not working. It worked yesterday.
Maybe I should continue with our agenda. And in the meantime, if you can find a way of bringing in Hussein's recording, we can come back to that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. And hopefully we will come back to hear from Hussein Sulieman. Anyway, with our two panelists that we have with us live, I think you will all agree with their background, we certainly have an excellent panel with a diverse and wide-ranging experience spanning literally decades of professional engagement. And most importantly, covering the length and breadth of Sudan and working in lots of different, engaging and working in lots of different ways. Anyway, I think this is
I would like to thank.
Oh, were you hearing Hussein?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's hear from Hussein.
Feinstein International Center for inviting me for this important event. My name is Hussein Sulieman. I am from Sudan. I am trained in forestry and cartography and currently working at University of Gadarif as professor at the Faculty of Environmental and Agricultural Sciences. At the same time, I am the director of the Center of Remote Sensing and GIS at University of Gadarif. My teaching obligations are in the area of environmental remote sensing and advanced courses and introductory courses in GIS also. Also, I teach other courses in the application of geospatial technology for human and natural resource development. It is general my background. As a consultant, I work in the area of climate change, land grabbing, natural resources development and mapping, and also pastoral and agro-pastoral systems in Sudan and dryland in general. I have professional knowledge and practical experience in coordinating and managing research projects with national and international organizations and institutions in the area of climate change and vulnerability, resilience and adaptation, and sustainable development of natural resources and livelihood, including fragile and conflict affected areas. In the last 13 months, I worked with UNEP Sudan, United Nations Environment Program in Sudan, as climate vulnerability consultant. This is general my background. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much to Hussein. And I should also just explain to our listeners that in preparing for this webinar, we did actually experience a lot of challenges, both with electricity and also with internet. So we are really delighted that Hussein was able to supply that recording. So let me turn to my first question, which I would like to ask each of you to respond to in turn, starting with Hassan. So Hassan, in your experience, what are the key issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in your professional experience in Sudan?
Thanks, Helen. So in terms of challenge for diversity and inclusion in Sudan, having worked in the development sector for more than 11 years, I think one of the major issues is to ensure that we always abide by the humanitarian principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, because I think promoting diversity and inclusivity within humanitarian sector is all about guaranteed, could be only guaranteed by these principles. So one of the challenges actually working in the field, trying to provide services to rural communities is sometimes there are teams that are working on the ground that are not really diverse in themselves. And that makes them quite biased towards supporting some communities more than others. Sometimes it might even tend to be a kind of focusing on few number of communities and excluding large numbers of areas from services. And I think the major reason for that is diversity within teams. Had there been always diversity, this kind of issue could be avoided, because it is really impartial to divert or channel all the resources you have to some communities and excluded others based on your own social or tribal affiliation. It is against the humanitarian principles. Mentioning these things, I'm not saying that this is quite rampant or practiced everywhere, but all I want to say is that this challenge exists in some areas, and there are also very good examples of national humanitarian actors, including NGOs, including staff members, who are doing everything they can to ensure that they are not biased, they are impartial, and they are delivering services in a very impartial way. So I think working in this sector particularly, this is the major issue for diversity and inclusivity in Sudan. Thanks.
Thank you, Hassan. Over to you, Nawal.
Okay, thanks, Helen. And actually, as you know, Sudan is so diverse, and we have a lot of nepotism and tribalism and even conflict of interest. And I'm not talking about the humanitarian here now. I'm talking about Sudan government and most of the crisis and the trouble we have because of impartiality and because of the nepotism and unfair. To give you an example, we have a whole department in the government. It's just from one village. One person, the head of department, employed all his, while all the Sudanese have the right to employment and to be in different sectors. And this is why it created a lot of conflicts, especially in the marginalized region. And because of that, we are having troubles, conflict in Darfur, in the east area, all over Sudan. Because of this, people don't see themselves representative in the country. They are excluded. And if you are minority group, when they come to inclusion, then they will also do it in tribalism. And if you notice, like, for example, Darfur state is being divided by tribes, and they believe there is certain majority tribe in an area. And according to that, they give all the civil servant to that tribe. And this doesn't work. And this excludes a minority, and of course, exclude women and people with special needs. And I believe the organizations, the humanitarian organizations, they are much better applying to the humanitarian principle and to this, to take care of inclusions. And we have good examples of international and UN agencies and even donor agencies taking care of the gender issues, the minority rights, the people with special needs, and abiding with the humanitarian principle more than the government. I am talking about previous government, and even this transitional government is really, they are trying to improve the situation, but up to now, they did not work well in this issue of diversity inclusion. Still, we have the political parties who are involved in this in the revolutions, in December revolution or April revolutions. They are now dividing their the power by partisanship. In the beginning, they agreed that any position in the transitional government should be held by a professional person despite his background or his tribalism or political party affiliation. But they set back and we went back to partisanship, and this is why we are not making any progress so far in this. And also we have a very good example of the national NGOs, Helen and others you are aware of, DARA. It have a very good inclusions from different ethnic background, and they are doing very well and professional work. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you very much, Nawal. And if we could now go over to the response from Hussein, and fingers crossed this is working.
Issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion from my experience in working in different parts of Sudan, I would like to highlight some main points. First of all, I would like to mention that Sudan itself is a very diverse country in terms of ethnicity and culture. Therefore, in case for somebody who would like to join such kinds working in Sudan, it's important to be prepared by some kind of inception or preparatory period of training, which could be considered as prerequisite to get acquaintance and to be more aware about the local context and setting. That should be taken into account and before joining any organization and starting to do some field work. At the same time, I think it's important to avoid the pre-assigned ideas and attitudes about the local ethnic group that would like to work with them. And also in case of working in issues related to livelihood activities, I think it is important to avoid the classification of local population into groups such as farmers and herders. Instead of that, it is better, I think, to follow more inclusion approach and talk about livelihood systems such as farming and pastoralism, because normally local populations they are practicing or in their livelihood more than one type of activity, and also classifying local population into very specific groups. This will raise some kind of tension, especially that the issue of farmers and herders has been tackled in the media in a way that might create some kind of local misunderstanding. Thank you.
Helen, I think you might be on mute.
Excuse me. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I think I'm going to move directly on to my second question so we can hear more perspectives from Hussein, from Nawal and Hassan. I believe we have no more recordings from Hussein, unfortunately, but I'm looking forward to hearing more from Nawal and Hassan. So my second question is, can you think or describe a time when you experienced a foreigner inadvertently reinforcing racist attitudes or structures? So let us start with Nawal.
Okay, thanks. Actually, I have experienced it personally. I used to work with an organization, international, and I'm based in Khartoum, and I traveled to Darfur, to Niala, my hometown, and she's an expert. She's head of Niala office when I came to the office just for a week trip. And I told her that when I came and introduced myself, she told me, I don't have any space for you in the office or in the guest house. I told her, for your information, I don't need space in the guest house because Niala is my hometown. But this is your office. It is the organization office, and I have entitled to her to sit on it as you are. And I'm coming here in official business. So one colleague, so also he's an expert, he knows me very well, we are sharing an office. He heard us shouting at each other. He came and took me to the other side and gave me a space and a seat there. As soon as I sit down, I wrote to the headquarters in Khartoum and I informed them about the incident. And because racism in the organization is really not accepted, they call her back and she never worked again with us in the country. So they take it very serious. And I personally believe, because I'm just not a white person, because of that, she treated me that way. But if she treated me as a colleagues and we have equal rights, she could welcome me in the office and we could have a better relation. So for this is I mean, very important to treat your colleague in equal manner, despite their background or whether they are national or international, and we are regard ourselves as a team and a team player, and it's very important for anyone who is coming from the students like to work in a country to respect the people, and then the people will respect you. But if you don't respect the people, they will not respect you, and you will not going to understand anything in the country or the situations. And to work as human beings, as adults, and respect each other is very important. Why I'm telling you this is just a life thing happened to me. It doesn't happen all the time, but it could happen. And also, and people have to be cautious about their wording, verbal wording. Most of the discriminations we have in the country, we use verbal word. So people need to understand a bit of the culture and the verbing, what that means. And I believe we have not only discrimination from outsiders to the insiders, we have also within the country, as I told you, a lot of tribalism, and people, there is certain people regard themselves better than others. And we just not discriminate by color, yani black versus white, or all of us are black, but certain people tend to have a lighter skin compared with others. There is kind of this discrimination, but there is another type of discrimination. Even the white people we discriminate against in Sudan, and we call them halabs. Halab, it have a lot of implication. If you say to the person that he's Halabi, it could mean an outsider, it could mean a mean person, and it have a lot of implications. And sometimes also body language, people use their body language in discriminative way. Yes, thank you. Are you with me? Hello? Hello? Oh.
Okay.
Hi. Sorry.
Lost...
Apologies. For some reason, my mute button, I seem to be double clicking it, but I think you can hear me now. Yes, so thank you so much, Nawal, for that reminder of the potential discrimination of the outsiders themselves, how they potentially discriminate and can be racist. So let me now turn to hear from Hassan. Over to you, Hassan.
Thanks, Helen. So my discussion to this question about reinforcing, or foreigners reinforcing racist attitudes or structure is a bit different, and it's more of a general trend rather than a personal experience. I grew up in Sudan, and under, like, when the ousted regime of the Muslim Brotherhood came to power, 1989. I was only 8 years, but I grew up seeing the tribalism and racism politically mobilized, even TV, even in national TV. There were lots of narratives against Christians, against Muslims, against Christians, Southerners, and currently, when I look back to that, I understand that that regime used that narrative against even other parts of the country for political reasons, for mere political gains. But it also strikes me to see a lot of international organizations, or many international organizations, including UN agencies, still publishing reports about conflicts in Sudan, about local conflicts, national conflicts, and they still use that identity lens when they look at conflicts. So based on that analysis, conflict is always between different tribes, different livelihood groups, different identity groups, Arabs versus Africans, as you mentioned in the beginning, Muslims against Christians, and that is problematic for many reasons. First of all, it fails to recognize the history of these diverse groups. These groups had their own times of cooperation. They had their own times of collaboration over natural resources. They had times of fighting against foreigner invaders collectively. They had times of protecting the assets of each other. They had times of cross marriages. They had lots of good times in their history. So to think of conflict as always driven by identity differences or primordial ancient hatred doesn't really capture the whole picture, and is problematic. The other reason is that this kind of analysis reinforces racism, because it also fails to see the positive nature or the positive side of the conflict. Conflict is always seen as a kind of negative phenomena leading to humanitarian crises, leading to mass killings, leading to economic underdevelopment and economic crashes. But that also conceals that as a phenomenon, war or conflict, it has we could look at it from a positivist side, that there are some political and economic gains that are made as a result of these conflicts. And these could be diverse. This could be preventing democratic transitions like we saw in Rwanda and we are currently seeing in Sudan. It could also be arms trade. It could be a whole list of illicit trade, cross-border trades that is happening in the borders between Sudan and between the borders of all the conflict zones in the conflict countries in Africa and probably elsewhere as well. So to conclude, we need to understand, if you don't want to be part of fueling conflict analysis and understanding of conflict is very important, but to resort to only one element of wide range of factors, including economic, including environmental, including social, including political, and to ignore that and just to focus on identity differences, it's very dangerous, and it could result in fueling conflict rather than resolving it. Unfortunately, even like organizations like the World Bank, when they look at conflicts, they perceive, they give more weight to ethnic diversity, or what they call ethnic diversity, than economic equality, inequality, for example. For them, economic inequality is not involved in conflict. It's more a reason of ethnic diversity, and the more the ethnically diverse a country, the less economically growing it is, the more prone it is to conflict. And that also leaning more towards that identity lens, ignoring other structural issues that could be involved inequality, racism, and lack of inclusivity. Yeah, so that's my response to that question. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks very much, Hassan. And thank you also, Nawal. I think both of your answers were incredibly helpful in highlighting both the importance of personal behaviors and attitudes, but also how our understanding can fuel these problems. I'd like to move to my third and final question, which is, I'd like to hear from you one or two examples of work that is being done, from your opinion, in an inclusive and equitable way in Sudan. Any examples of we've heard about the problems. Can you give examples of how work is being done in a more inclusive and equitable way? And maybe we should start again with Nawal, since we do not have Hussein with us. Over to you, Nawal.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Actually, we have a lot of good work, especially international organizations, and this is where I work a lot, and most of my career is working. I have not worked with the government a lot. I have seen, but the international organization, we have quite well working together. We try to use our resources collectively, and we do research together, especially like in the drought situation or the famine situation, and even we divide the areas. When we come to support, we divide the areas geographically, who will cover what, in order to use our resources. And also we used to work as multidisciplinary teams. We have teams from different backgrounds. We include, of course, the academic professionals. And also we don't tend to exclude the ethnicity. We try to be inclusive, to have a gender perspective also, and to include as much as we could from diverse ethnic background. Of course, if you want to work in certain area, and that area is predominantly by certain tribe, it's better to have in your team somebody from that tribe who is fully aware of their culture, and he can even, bring the attention of the other team that what to do and what not to do, and what to say and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So it's important to have diversity and to have expertise, and people have knowledge about the context in the area that you are working in. And also, I feel to have expert and national is a very good mixture, because they are bringing expertise from other countries having similar problem to the one that we have. So working in the organization in diverse team, and I work through my career almost with many people from the 5 continents of the world, many nationalities, and of course it's very important also when you are working in a diverse team to be tolerant and sensitive to other cultures or religions. And it's very important to pay attention to this, in addition to have in your team a person who is fully aware of the area and its diversity and loopholes. I remember when we went to work in White Nile, and there is a Sudanese proverb. I don't know if somebody will translate that. I will say it in Arabic. We used to say, "Al-nas fi shunu wal Hassaniya fi shunu." And it happens that we went to work in Hassaniya's area, and one of our colleagues, we are doing a training course. She said that, and oh, of course, that provoked people. And so others, colleagues who are from the area, they intervene and they explain to the people she is just a new staff member and she's not aware. This is common thing that people are saying, and so it creates a lot of trouble. So because of that, I believe to have a person from the area who is really coming from this diverse team, but enjoy having a very good, successful work, and we benefit particularly from our colleagues who are coming from the region, either some African countries or from the different part of the world. They bring a wealth of experience, and we exchange ideas, and we really enjoy working together as a team with mutual understanding and respect. And thank you.
Thank you, Nawal. Over to you, Hassan.
Thank you, Helen. So the example that I would like to go is about a research work that was done by the Feinstein International Center in 2019. The center published a study about the vulnerability of a camel herding group in Darfur called the Northern Rizegat. And the report is titled Livelihoods, Power and Choice, the Vulnerability of Northern Rizegat, Sudan, Darfur, Sudan. The study was carried out by a group of Sudanese and non-Sudanese scholars, but in my view, it was quite significant in trying to tackle the issues of lack of inclusivity and racism, particularly within the development sector, because it tried to investigate the issues and the challenges that this often marginalized group is facing. It was not only significant for that particular group, identity group, but I would say also for all mobile pastoralist groups within the region. So that particular group of North and West Darfur has always been associated with the previous regime's counterinsurgency against the Darfuri rebels, and they are always notoriously depicted as the perpetrators who committed lots of crime as a whole group. And that actually limited the attention that should have been given to understanding the challenge, the livelihoods of these groups are facing. And it also kind of a generalized understanding of an involvement of a particular group within a group in a conflict, and try to generalize that view of perpetrators for the whole group. So that study revealed a lot of policy and institutional challenge, historical challenge that particular group has been facing in terms of access to natural resources, and get a lot within our sector to think more about the vulnerabilities of these groups, including the challenges they face in terms of livestock thefts, for example, or inability to access specific range lands during specific seasons because of having their migratory routes being blocked. So I think that study from within the sector that I work with was very important, particularly for those who have interest in livelihoods in Darfur. It was quite important to uncover lots of misunderstanding and to debunk them, basically, more than to just uncover them. And finally, just to respond to the other part of the question, if foreigners are coming to Sudan and they want to contribute to breaking down racist structures and attitude, I think learning about global inequalities is important. Learning about national inequalities within their countries is also important, because by the time they come to Sudan, they will realize that although racism and inequality manifest itself differently in different countries, the root causes are quite similar. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both of you. Very helpful remarks. It is not only really interesting to hear what you're saying, I also think it's very important, especially these direct experiences. And I think you have provided us with some really important reminders. I mean, the last comment from Hassan about we mustn't forget about the global national inequalities more broadly, because actually the roots are very similar. I was also struck by the comments on the lack of diversity and where the fact that that is found everywhere in different forms. And for international organizations, the risk it has in undermining the work of international organizations, the risk for neutrality, or the way in which it addresses certain forms of discrimination. I think also we keep hearing about the importance of understanding the context and cultural sensitivity. This requires some effort, and I think we even heard that at times it might require formal training and definitely questioning all the time our own assumptions. I appreciated the comments about working with people who have a deep local knowledge from Nawal, because even I'm struck that Nawal has these decades of really firsthand experience, but nevertheless appreciates meeting with people who have more specific local experience. And I think that's something that we also all need to bear in mind. And anyway, now I think I should like to open it up for discussion and invite you, our listeners, to share your views and questions. So as I explained at the beginning, you can put your hand up by clicking on the raise hand symbol at the bottom of the screen. This way, I can actually invite you to say your questions in the order that they are asked. We will keep everyone on mute except for when we invite you to ask a question. If you prefer, as I think some people do, to put your questions into the chat box or the Q&A, then we will read those out for you. So let me check. Oh, excuse me. So I think we have a question from Richard Loban to the panelists. And I'm going to need to scroll back to make sure I haven't missed any. While diversity can certainly be divisive, can the panelists suggest ways in which it can be a strength? So who would like to start? Hassan or Nawal? Or maybe I should make it easier and go straight to you, Hassan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Diversity, yeah, I've never considered diversity a problem. I've always, particularly within Sudan, considered it an asset, something that can allow the country to grow and can allow our communities to develop. I think let's look at it from a geographical perspectives. Within Sudan, there are several geographical regions, including desert, semi-desert, low rainfall, savanna, high rainfall, savanna in some few places, and we have some mountainous areas. And in those different regions, people cultivate different variety of crops. There are areas that are good for certain crops. There are other regions that are better for other crops. So in terms of food security, that opens a huge door for complementarity between different regions in terms of which crops or goods that specific region could supply. For example, Darfur is basically the hub of the livestock production in Sudan, more than any other region. The northern Sudan is the hub for dates production. South Kordofan and Gadarif, sorghum surplus areas. So this is only one example, but I also like the examples of culture. These different environments, different groups grow different cultures in terms of music, in terms of dancing, in terms of language, and some of that is even connected to neighboring countries, and could help the country in building better relationships with neighboring countries rather than going into regional disputes and conflicts. It could also enrich this cultural diversity. It could also enrich the country culturally, and promoting this diverse culture is just an asset. In countries, in some countries, people are looking for diversity of languages and cultures, but in Sudan, we have the problem. Our political elites are always trying to Arabize. They are trying to impose Muslim identity, one religious identity on people. I'm not saying there's a problem being Muslim, but I'm saying that cannot be imposed politically. We need to respect the diversity and allow people to have the freedom of faith, just like any other country, and it will be an asset still. So that's my response. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Nawal, I wondered if you wanted to comment. I remember your comment earlier about the organization Dara in Darfur, and they strike me, from what I've heard, are one of the most diverse national NGOs. And I wondered, is that seen as a particular strength, and whether you could kind of comment on diversity in that light?
Yeah, it is. Actually, the diverse is always a strength. But unfortunately here in Sudan, we don't manage it very well. And I mean, our politicians or the leaders are not managing that diversity very well. And that is, Sudan is very rich in terms of culture, language, different language, but always there is the people who are in power, they want to impose certain culture upon that, and that's why we have a lot of conflict in the area in Sudan, the regional or versus the center. And if we manage the diversity, it could be the best country on earth in terms of geographical differences, as stated by Hassan, and also the people and the different culture. If we manage that culture very well, we would be a very good country and very prosperous country. But for the example of Dara is because it is most of the people who really founders of Dara are intellectuals, and they are aware of this, the diversity issue and the inclusions. So it includes people from different backgrounds, and also most of them are national professional in the field of the humanitarian and development. And because of that, it progressed as one of the best and leading national organization, because it has expertise and the diversity also in the organization, and it enjoy that, and it progress so well compared with other national organizations. So if we manage to manage our diversity in the country and to give a chance for others, that will be great and helpful. And there is an attempt actually from this transitional government, and particularly the endowment minister for the religious. He did a very good thing. He invited all the religions, and even he have different department for other religions, Christianity, Jewish, and he invites them to come back to the country, and he believes on the diversity and religions and respect of other religions, and he start to work on it in his own department, and he's talking about being moderate, accepting others' religions, and this is really very good. And we need also to see diversity in our media, in our newspaper and stuff. The people in the TV and the radio, they did not work because the culture in our media is just dominated by a central culture. But you don't see yourself in the rest of Sudan are part of it if you look at our media or other heritage. But we have a very good heritage, and it could, and this diversity could encourage even, what do you call it, tourists to come to the country to see the diverse area and the diverse culture. And if they manage it very well, it can benefit the country and benefit the people, and people can try to understand each other. And people are living for centuries together, having intermarried, but not in all the areas. In certain areas, certain tribes, they don't marry because other tribes, they look into them as inferior. But the core issue for me in Sudan is how to manage this diversity so that you can benefit from it as a country and the rest of the world. And thank you.
Thank you, Nawal. I see we have a hand up. I'd like to go over to Dirk to hear your question. Thanks very much. I think we will take you off mute. Anne, could you do that? Oops.
Try one more time. Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, hello. So my name is Dirk. I'm an economist, and I have some Sudan working experience. And currently, I'm advising the UNITAMs. And unfortunately, I do it from home. Anyhow, I think we will agree that this question of diversity, equity, inclusion in Sudan, or the lack of it, is not only a question of personal behavior, but it will also be, it is one of institutional structures. So I have two questions. One, are there any CSOs, any think tanks now in Sudan working on this? And the second question, taking up from what Nawal said on her experience of nepotism in a village where a department was all staffed from one village. I understand that many decision makers in civil service in Sudan, and for example also ambassadors, are still from former regime. My question, is that correct? And if yes, why is this the case? Two years after the political transition began. Thanks.
I think back to you, Nawal, if you'd like to take that question.
Didn't hear the part of the civil society organization. Yes, the civil society, or if he's asking whether the civil society organization is doing some work or not, they do actually, if this is the question. Because I didn't hear it well. They do, and they do kind of civic education in this civic education with different groups, youth, women, and community leaders. And so they are working on it as civil society organizations. But it's important to have official work on that. And regarding the nepotism and tribalism, it is true. It is institutional, as you said, in Sudan, and particularly by the former regime. And the current transitional, they are working, but they did not manage, of course, to get rid of all former regime from the different departments in the government. And it's not easy actually to sack all the people and shut the department. So you need to do it gradually. They are taking the head, but of course it's not enough to remove the heads. You need to work and to do restructuring. We are talking about restructuring and reforming a lot of things. The whole system in Sudan, it needs to be reformed in terms of law and legislations and regulation, and particularly the Justice Department, the Attorney General, the police, the security, all you name it, all the sectors in the country, honestly, because others people have been marginalized and pushed away. And the whole institute is just one-party institutes. And also they have one ideology, Islamization and Arabization, and exclusion of other people from the different institutes. If you are working in Sudan, for sure you will be aware of that and encounter that. So for the transitional government, they are really in a very bad position because they found a lot of troubles and they have to put priority which one to address first. And one of the issues, they talk about the destructions of the former regime and restructuring the different institute, but it is going to take time and it is very difficult. It's not so easy. And of course, also we have the transitional government is not that so homogeneous. Although they are saying, okay, we are working, we have this kind of very awkward situation where we have the military working with the civilian. When we are talking about democracy and transition from dictator to democracy, and most of the as you are aware, the military who are in power are the former security agent of the former regime, and so there is not so that many changes in terms of the structures of the military and the security and even the civilian department, and it takes time. So for them as transitional government, they put their priority, peace, and then the economic crisis. And so far, peace has been, they make a progress, but it's not really inclusive yet. And in the economic crisis, they are still struggling and people are really fed up because the situation, economic situation, it became worse. We knew that the coronaviruses have its impact and also the effect of it in the international economic, it will have effect because Sudan is not in isolation from the rest of the world, but unfortunately people, the local people, they don't see that and they see it as a failure from the current regime that they are not able to provide them with basic service like bread, fuel, oil, and all this stuff. So if the government is really not managing this economic crisis, it may fall. And we hope, we don't want to go back to dictator system, and we hope that they will manage to put the economic in a good shape, in addition to restructuring of course, there is a lot of resistance, of course, for this restructuring of these different institutes from the regime of the formal regime, because they are very much in power in terms of economics. They are controlling the economics. They are controlling everything in country is controlled by them. So in few, and they have been working for empowering themselves for 30 years. This 30 years empowerment, it is very hard to diminish all that in 2 years. So, but people are working on it, and I hope we will come one day to move from this system to prosperous and democratic Sudan. And thank you. I hope I answer your question. I didn't miss part of it.
Thank you very much, Nawal. Thank you for those clarifications. I think there is another question that on the same topic from Matthew that I'm going to read out, and I'd like to give Hassan the opportunity to respond. So Matthew's question is diversity, equity, and inclusion an issue for Sudan's ongoing transition? If so, what does it mean for the new Sudan, and how can this be achieved? So over to you, Hassan.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Matthew, for that question. Yeah, it's not an issue, it's a positive issue, actually. And I have to say, For those who followed how the transition came about, how people took to streets, how people demanded justice and transition to civilian rule, you would notice that without the diversity of Sudan, without recognizing that movement could have not been successful in pushing some elements within the government to topple the current regime or the ousted regime. So these demonstrations started in Damazin, in Blue Nile first, and then it moves to Gadarif, Eastern Sudan, and then to Akbara in the River Nile, and then all big towns around the countries, including Zalinji, including the Fashir, including Niala, including the Lubayd. All these towns took to the streets demanding transition to civilian rule in Sudan. But unfortunately, the transition itself is incomplete and is sort of, for me, hijacked already, because it was done based on a power sharing agreement that still allowed the military some power, or the military apparatuses some power within the government. And these military organizations, they are not just organizations, they represent specific interests, nationally and internationally, including regional neighboring countries in the Arab world, and also they represent interests of some group within the ousted regime. So civilian rule cannot be achieved without civilians having monopoly over military or police, because military and police can always act independently, and they don't feel pressured, or they don't feel that they should abide by what the civilians are telling them, because the power sharing agreement allowed them independent situation, and it even kind of legalized militias like the Rapid Support Force. So going back to the question of the diversity has been at the heart of the transition in Sudan. Without it, without different identity, without different geographical regions taken to the streets, the transition, even with its kind of distorted shape now, could have never happened. The problem comes with the peace agreements. The peace agreements themselves, they are not dealing with the issues of inequality, the issues of underdevelopment, all the issues of racism institutionally. They are not dealing with them. All what is being discussed is how many seats do we have within the Sovereign Council, how many seats do we have within the cabinet, and what has happened by the power share agreement between the FFC and between the Forces of Freedom and Change, which is the opposition alliance, and the military council, just continued with the peace agreement. It's about how do we share power, how do we share prestige, but there is no any thinking around how, as Sudanese, can we really sit down and dismantle these structures of racism and inequality, economic grievances in the peripheries of the country, in all the regions of the Sudan. How can we transform our communities and give the people a decent life? There's no discussion about that. There is a complete reliance on international institutions providing some sort of finance and also some sort of expertise in peace building, like the peace mission. Yeah, it doesn't really respond to the real issues, the real challenge that the government or the country is facing. It's rather try to respond to insecurities outside Sudan, not our own insecurities. So yeah, that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. We only have 10 minutes left and we have 3 questions coming up. So if I could ask the panelists to be brief in their answers, that would be great. So let me go to our first question from Gabriella.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle. Thank you for this presentation and for sharing your views. One of my questions was about the economic situation of the peripheries and that source of diversity, but I was also curious about the role of women and youth in this revolution. I think famously, the revolution was initially led by a really large proportion of women, a majority, and they were involved throughout urban regions, famously like some famous images, and also rural regions of Sudan. And I'm curious how you see currently these groups' demands being satisfied for equality and inclusion in politics, legal, social, and economic realms, and also how CSOs are able to continue to push back against the kind of holdover military forces in the transitional government, and how the sit-in is able to hold these groups accountable to their demands. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Who would like to have a go at that? Nawal.
I
think this is.
Start there. I mean, it's true. The women and the youth are in the heart of this revolution, and especially in the rural areas. And it's not started only in this in the December, but it started early in Darfur. I mean, this movement and the rebellions movement, and also the fight in the 3 areas and in the east, it is all kind of resistance to the current regime, and that is weakening the regime, and it reaches the point until it falls. The women, they really play very good role, and unfortunately, they didn't get the position that they deserve in the current transitional government. And this is one of the big issues, and women movement and civil society organization, they are making and they are protesting, put in constitutional document that the women should enjoy 40% of the civil servant and the legislative council, which is up to now, it's not formulated due to there are a lot of disagreement. And really the transition, nobody is happy about that. And for the economic and the rural areas, is of course the economic in Sudan is all of it is in a very bad shape. And in our rural Sudan, people either depend on the agriculture or livestock. This is the livelihood of the people in the rural areas. And there is few people who do, like few percent do petty trading. But of course, all different crises, like the conflict driven the people from the rural areas, and they are living in IDP camps, and they are receiving food aid. They are not able to produce because of insecurity. And that is affecting, of course, the production very much. And many people become relief dependent in the country. And of course, also we have the shortage of fuel, and the fuel crisis, its impact on everything in the country, and it's worse in the rural areas and even in the regions, the main cities of the region, more than Khartoum. Khartoum also is suffering, and you can see queuing of people in the petrol station and queuing for bread. It is really not in a good shape, and the transitional government is really facing a lot of issues. And also this is the competition of the military versus nobody. If who enjoy, say, privilege for a long time, they don't want that privilege to be taken away from them. And most of our economic and big companies in the country is actually is controlled by either security or the military. And people are talking about it, especially the civilian, and they have a lot of dispute on that. And they are working on solving it out, and we hope they will sort it out. I hope I didn't miss part of the question. Yeah, if Hassan have addition, you can.
Yeah, I think yeah, you've covered it, Nawal. These regions in the peripheries continue to be deprived, and they are increasingly deprived, and there is no vision of investment whatsoever in those regions, neither by the civilians, nor by the military, I have to say. And very recently, the head of the police in Khartoum, just to give you a sense of the women's situation, responds to a question about some people who say that they are going to lash any women that are undressed well or undressed respectfully in the streets. He said he will never hold them accountable. He will never catch them. And he even said at some point that the public order law, which also states clearly how, like, have punishment for people or women who dress specific kind of dress, like trousers and stuff. He wants that law to be back. So the situation of women were in the front lines of protests in Khartoum and everywhere. Demonstrations started with women's whistles, actually, or some sort of noise, and the demonstration starts. But now there is a backlash, actually, from some components of the government, and it is not only about representation or participation. That's important, but the genuine issues of the rural women, the unjust economic situation, deprivation from access to resources, there's no thinking about that whatsoever. Yeah.
Thank you, Hassan. Let us turn quickly to our next question. Aya, would you like to give us your question, please?
Yeah, sure. My question was that Sudan has a lot of human capital national.
I lost you. Can other people hear you?
Sudanese youth outside of Sudan can be very useful to the development of Sudan, especially. Sorry, could you hear me?
Excuse me, it cut out for a bit, but maybe others heard.
No, I didn't.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, repeat the question, please.
Sure. Sudan has a lot of human capital nationally and globally. Without a doubt, the experiences of eager Sudanese youth outside of Sudan can be very useful to the development of Sudan, especially at a youth level. What would be some of the useful ways to bridge that gap to help Sudan propel forward and to build a globally integrated Sudan on a diaspora native relationship level?
Actually, we do value our Sudanese expertise outside the country, and especially the youth. In our organization, we attempt to organize a conference. We organize a conference for diaspora youth, mainly coming from the States and Europe, and they came and set a dialogue with the local youth here. They are trying to help them and see how they can help with their expertise in the country, and some of them are really did a lot good things, and we are still looking forward to have the expertise of particularly the youth who want to work with those youth in terms of entrepreneurship and the development and in many ways, and even in the health sector, in the education sectors, And the country is in need, and we regard ourselves started from scratch. So any expertise, any help that will be useful, and particularly the technical know-how, is important that they can bring the diasporas, especially the expert in different areas, and it will help. Apart from the government is just looking for the revenues and the dollars and the hard currency, but for us, we believe the knowledge and know-how is also important, and we are in our organization, we are prepared to help any diasporas who want to make any kind of interpretations or working either in the rural areas or at the regional level or even at the national.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to give the panelists a last chance to give any final words of advice to researchers coming to Sudan, or warning about potential pitfalls they need to be aware of. Over to you, Hassan.
My advice is to try to get as much knowledgeable as you can about the country, its history, communities, and to be willing to engage at the community level. So don't if you're coming to Sudan, please don't come just for being paid well with any of these organizations. That's good. It's always good to be paid well, but come and interact with the people and have some social experience. That's valuable will be valuable for you and for us as well.
And over to you, Nawal.
Yeah, there's not so much to say apart from what Hassan said, but I mean also to be mind and respected to the local culture, and also to be a bit sensitive in wording and anything, and that you will not know only from the local people that you are working with, and to actually to respect the indigenous knowledge. And I want to give example very quickly. There is a very famous program in North Darfur. It's supposed to be water spread project, and there is international expert come to that area. They did the survey with the satellite and everything. They want to build a dam in a wadi valley and seasonal valley. The people, the indigenous people in the valley, told them that the area where you want to build is not going to hold, and the water will wash it out. They didn't listen to them, and they say, oh, we on the survey we did satellite. They don't respect their knowledge. And it is true, the rainy season was not good in North Darfur for over 30 years back. But unfortunately, when they built the dam, the rainy season became very good rainy season, and it washed away, and millions of dollars was washed away. So it's good to respect and listen to the indigenous knowledge. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Nawal, and thank you, Hassan. It's time to wrap up. And yes, my thanks to you for a really great discussion. And I want to just echo everything that I've heard from you both, and wish all our researchers well, and really hope that you get to Sudan. Thanks to you all for joining us today and for sharing your questions and experience. So this concludes our webinar for today. And I'd just like to say one final thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.